Tri-State Freethinkers podcast lecture series from March 3rd, 2016, Why Do We Believe or Don't Believe in God? Featuring speaker Dr. Gervais.
So I'm switching things up a little bit. I have two main lines of research. One of them is on why people do or don't believe what they believe, especially in terms of supernatural beliefs. And then I have another consistent line of research where I actually look at people's perceptions of atheists and non-religious people. These perceptions tend to not be good. And I'm trying to figure out why people have such strong opinions about atheists, and then potentially what we can do to improve that. So we'll do a bit of background. I don't know, can we kill a light right there by any chance? Nobody needs to see me, but my slides have like graphs and things. So who am I? Where did I come from? Why do you care what I have to say? So back in the day, I got my undergrad degree at the University of Denver in Colorado. And I was a psychology major. I actually started out in evolutionary biology. That got me into psychology. And I did research on visual perception. But it wasn't very interesting. My mind was still on Darwin's ideas about evolution and natural selection. And around this time, I thought, all right, maybe I should go to graduate school. Seemed like the graduate school lifestyle might be a good fit for me. If you know any grad students, there's not much of that money floating around. So I spent a lot of my time reading kind of popular press books about evolution and evolutionary psychology. And a lot of great books here. Some of them, I think, take kind of too dim a view of the role of culture in human evolution. They kind of pit evolution versus culture, which the more I've studied it, it doesn't make much sense to think of those as opposing forces. And the book that really convinced me by Richardson and Boyd, it's a great one. Pick it up if you get a chance. It's called Not by Genes Alone. And I think they make a very persuasive case that if you want to understand human evolution, you really need to understand how culture works. The idea that we actually have genetically evolved adaptations for acquiring and transmitting culture. And yeah, powerful stuff. So I knew that I'd want to study something kind of at the intersection of evolution, culture, and cognition. That took me to the University of British Columbia here in Vancouver. There's downtown Vancouver. Somehow they scored a peninsula jutting out into the ocean and thought, hey, let's have a university there. There's my apartment. It was a shithole. And it looks really nice here in Vancouver. Here's what it looks like 8 months of the year. It's Pacific Northwest, so visit in August. All right, so I knew I wanted to study something kind of broadly in this area, but specifically what to study. And I realized then that I could kind of combine my academic interests with something that I had always casually been interested in. So what's the deal with religion? Most people on Earth today are religious. This has basically always been the case. We've yet to find any society that doesn't seem to have some sort of religion. And people's religious beliefs, they're not just beliefs that they casually hold. Instead, religious belief motivates action. People do things because of their religious beliefs that they probably wouldn't otherwise do. And also getting into why religion is somewhat of an evolutionary puzzle. Aardvarks don't do this. Hummingbirds don't do this. So just try to imagine, millions of any old individual critter congregating like this. Just doesn't happen. So something weird is going on in our species. But at the same time, we can talk about how religion's universal, how most people are religious. Not everybody's religious. So on Sunday morning, when a lot of people might be lining up for communion, we've got a lot of people with other refreshments on their minds, potentially. Less sacred, more secular here. So if you crunch the numbers worldwide in terms of what are the biggest religions out there, Christianity comes in number 1. I'm sure a lot of you guys know this. Islam number 2. Hinduism is the 3rd biggest. And then the 4th biggest worldwide is various stripes of non-believers. And this can be kind of tricky to work out the numbers. But we'll get to that a bit later. There are lots and lots of people out there who, even though religion is so prevalent, they themselves are not religious, which really motivates a lot of my research. So most people are religious, tons of people aren't, and we see interesting patterns where religion can kind of wax and wane over time. So I'm really interested in what's going on psychologically, culturally, evolutionarily, that explains why so many people are religious, but also so many people are not. And then also I'm interested in considering the consequences of either religious belief or religious disbelief. So that was me through grad school. This is still how I research. As I mentioned, this landed me a pretty sweet gig at the University of Kentucky, which when I was on the job market, I was kind of surprised to get an interview in Kentucky with what I study. And I love it there. It's great. I shouldn't have been surprised, though, because Kentucky has a very rich history in evolution. So who's this? Anybody know? William T. Scopes of Scopes Monkey Trial, UK grad. In his memoirs, he gives credit to two of his professors at UK for inspiring him to teach. So these are Professors Funkhauser and McVeigh. I confess I don't know which is which. I'd have to try to remember when I was going through Google Images. But what's really cool, here's Castle Hall, which is the UK Psych building. There's my office. That's the Funkhauser building. That's the McVeigh building. So it's a kind of a fun reminder every day in my office that I can look out and see buildings named after two of the people who inspired Scopes to teach. So again, Kentucky's awesome. So again, that's my research in a nutshell. What I'm mostly going to be focusing on today, although we'll have a loop around later, is over here. What are the consequences of religious disbelief? So what are the consequences of religious disbelief? Anything? Shout something.
Relief.
Relief? All right. That's like sleeping on Sundays is awesome. This is going off topic, but it was way back in my master's thesis research. We had to do a study where people would have to imagine a conversation between an atheist and a believer, and they'd kind of talk back and forth, and they had to jot down 3 things that they thought they'd each say to each other. And one of my participants wrote something, and quickly their 2 characters started fighting. And then eventually the atheist said, well, you could go to church every Sunday, or you could stay home and have lots of sex instead. So evidently, that's one consequence of atheism. Most of my stuff on consequences of disbelief isn't on some of these potential benefits of, free time on Sunday, relief from getting out of religion, perhaps, but instead it makes people not like you, unfortunately, in a lot of the world. So if we want to investigate popular perceptions of atheists, we could do the scientific thing and go to Google Images and search up atheists. So atheists enjoy eating babies. He's seen this one. We have vacant stare notices Pop-Tarts before the omnipresence of God. What's in his pockets? Assorted lint, the seeds of Satan. So the general perceptions of atheists are kind of morally questionable, uninhibited, etc. So that's kind of goofy Google Images searches. But there's actually now a fair bit of research documenting negative perceptions of atheists and prejudice against atheists. One nifty example, who's heard this one, the Atheist Shoes Study? Pretty cool. So this shoe company in Berlin, their name is Atheist Shoes, and they got some complaints where people in the US were saying, I order your shoes, it takes for damn ever for these shoes to show up. Maybe it's because you package them in a box that has your logo on top that just says the word atheist. So they did a study. They had, I forget how many it was, 79, something like that? 89 people who had placed orders in the US. So they'd put, take the pair of shoes, put one shoe in one box, one shoe in another box. One box gets the atheist tape, the other box gets just plain old packaging tape. Then they send them out on the same day and ask people to report when each box shows up. And they found that the atheist labeled boxes showed up much later, and they were more likely to go missing entirely.
It was like weeks.
Yeah, so some of them it's a pretty substantial difference. I've actually been in touch with these guys. They got in touch with me trying to plan follow-up studies. It turns out a couple of them actually have training in experimental psychology, so it was a pretty legit study. They also sent me a free pair of shoes. They're really comfortable. Yeah, so this is kind of one interesting real-world example. Another way we can look at this is if you look at large-scale polls of cultural inclusion and exclusion, the typical way that Gallup or Pew would do this, they'd say, all right, would you vote for a well-qualified member of your own preferred political party if they happen to be a blah. And then you look at what percentage of people who would say, yeah, I'd vote for somebody who happened to belong to that group. So if we have 0% of people, 50, 100%, people overwhelmingly say that they'd, for instance, vote for a Catholic candidate, or a black candidate, or a Mormon candidate, or a gay candidate, or a Muslim candidate. And consistently, as they run this poll every few years, atheists barely get up to that 50% line. Depending on what other groups are thrown in the poll, they're always either the lowest or the second lowest. And psychologically speaking, this is a weird group to have strong feelings about. So as Ricky Gervais puts it, saying atheism is a worldview is like saying not going skiing is a hobby. If you learn that somebody's an atheist, you know almost nothing about them. You know one thing that they happen to not believe. Whereas for most groups that we look at in the prejudice literature, typically prejudice is driven by intergroup conflict, identifiable lines between the two, some sort of tangible resource at stake. So just finding out that somebody doesn't believe in God, this should give you no kind of potent inferences about why you might really have any strong feelings toward these people, let alone negative perceptions. So what's the deal? Why do people have such strong negative reactions towards atheists? What I would argue, based on a bunch of research we've done over the last, I don't know, probably 10 years by now, is that a lot of it comes down to people's intuitions about morality. So where do people think morals come from? Why do we think that some people can be good people, other people are bad people? And I think a lot of people, the intuition is that morality is ultimately rooted in religion. Yeah, so they would actually say morality is ultimately this religious struggle between good and evil. Religion teaches us what's right and what's wrong. Religion gives us motivation to choose right over wrong. And this seems to drive people's perceptions of atheists. But we could start out actually by asking, well, what is this relationship between religion and morality? So let's ask the scientists. What's actually out there? So some scientists would actually say, yeah, we do have some evidence that some aspects of religion are tied to some morally relevant outcomes. So for instance, there's, which one am I looking for? Experimental work. If you get religious participants in the lab and you subtly get them to think about their religion, they will behave more generously, even in anonymous economic games. It seems to be a pretty stable effect. You do the same thing. You get religious people, you prime them to think about religion, and they're better able to resist temptation in the lab. You also see cross-cultural effects where, for instance, groups that have more exposure to big world religions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, these people, again, seem to be more cooperative, even in anonymous contexts. And there's some kind of mixed evidence on religion promoting charitable donations. Religious people tend to give more money, especially to their religions. We could also find other scientists who would say, well, it's not so simple. We don't have this one-to-one correspondence between religion and morality. So for instance, if you look at work by Franz de Waal, a famous primatologist, they find kind of basic moral building blocks in our closest non-human primate relatives. Nobody's saying bonobos are religious. So if they have what looks like morality, this tells us that some aspect of morality has nothing whatsoever to do with religion. There's also interesting research where you can see kind of early developing innate moral instincts in preverbal infants as young as 3 months old, which it doesn't seem like it's morality coming online at 3 months old. It's just that that's how old babies have to be before they can sit still to run an experiment. And as we get better at figuring out what babies think, you can keep pushing that age a bit younger. So if we ask our scientists, what's the relationship between religion and morality, they'd say it's complicated, but we're working on it. Some aspects of religion might drive some moral outcomes, but it's certainly not the case that morality ultimately boils down to religion. There's our scientific consensus, such as it is. My research, though, is saying I don't care that much about what the actual relationship is between religion and morality. I want to know what everyday lay perceptions are of this relationship. and especially what this can tell us about why people don't like atheists. And so the lay perceptions are much less nuanced than scientific perceptions. So again, a lot of people, if you ask them where does morality come from, well, they'll say, duh, morality comes from religion. Religion gives us our rules for what's right and what's wrong. And beyond just giving us the rules and telling us what's right and what's wrong, it gives us a reason to act on these rules. So if you believe that there's a morally concerned God out there who knows not only what you're doing, but also what you're thinking and feeling, and furthermore that this God has the ability to punish you if you do wrong or reward you when you do good, this might lead you to just have more motivation to be moral, to be good, to have good values. I snapped this one on the Washington Mall shortly before giving a similar talk. Protect yourself from crime, free Bible literature. Again, this is this kind of popular association where people are saying, you know what, if you want to get rid of immoral stuff out there, get more religion. The general idea is that if you believe that there's this kind of morally concerned God who's monitoring your behavior, this might lead you to kind of resist temptation, and these beliefs can change people's behaviors. Silly Google images aside, some evidence for this viewpoint comes from, again, Pew, where they'll ask people whether or not they agree with the statement that it's necessary to believe in God in order to be moral and have good values. Notice this is really strongly worded. It's not asking people whether or not they think religion might make you a little bit better. It's saying, yeah, without belief in God, you flat out cannot be moral. And in the US, 57% of people agree with that statement. USA. And the USA is not really an outlier. So this is a shitty graph. They did it, not me. But basically, only in Western Europe do you see people consistently disagreeing with that statement rather than agreeing with it. So the US is an outlier on a lot of things in terms of religion, not the least bit in terms of this perception that you need belief in God in order to have morality. So this leads to a prediction that I've tested across a bunch of studies. They all use the exact same method, so I'll run through the experimental setup to make sure we've got that down, and then I'll show you a whole bunch of results. So the prediction here is that to the extent that people actually view religion as a necessary component of morality, this means that at a gut level, people should intuitively assume that atheists are more capable than other people of engaging in immoral actions. Makes sense. If religion is what keeps us nice, get rid of religion, then who knows what these people are going to be up to. So the basic task, we can get into psychology. Can anybody name either of these people? They've won Nobel Prizes. Kahneman and Tversky. Danny Kahneman has a recent book out. They do a bunch of work looking at how people actually reason about the world. Do we engage in kind of effortful, rational thinking, or do we just go with our guts? Turns out we mostly just go with our guts. Nobel Prize. So they have this classic finding called the representativeness heuristic, and it goes something like this. So here's Linda. She's 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Which is more probable? A, Linda's a bank teller. B, Linda's a bank teller who's active in the feminist movement. Who says A? Who says B? All of you were wrong. So if you think about this rationally and in terms of the conditional logic implied and probability, everybody who's a bank teller who's active in the feminist movement is a bank teller. So B is fully subsumed by A, and it makes sense if you think it through. But even the people who said A, did you have a bit of a gut reaction telling you to pick B? The description just sounded like that, right? Yeah, exactly. Cheater, kick him out. So in their work, it's like 2/3 of people pick option B, even though it logically can't be true. How does this work? We get a description of Linda. Option B implies a group that she may or may not belong to. And if the description fits well with that group membership, then we have this intuitive pull to pick option B. But it turns out you can break this effect. So imagine I gave you that exact same description of Linda. Then I ask you which is more probable, A, Linda's a bank teller, Or B, Linda's a bank teller who's an avid big game hunter. All right, who's tempted to pick option B? Nobody. So in this case, we have a description, we have an implied group membership. They don't fit at all. And when I do this, typically 0% of people pick option B. There's just no intuitive pull to do that. So I had some studies, actually these are back in grad school now, where I wanted to look at intuitive moral distrust of atheists. So the idea here is you give people different descriptions, you pair them with different potential group memberships, and you can basically see when this effect shows up. When it shows up, that's basically an indicator that at a kind of gut level, people are saying, yes, that group of people would do that kind of stuff that you just described. So he came up with the description of a guy who was on his way to work, and he backed his car into his neighbor's van. And then he gets out, and some people are watching, so he pretends to write down his contact information and tucks an empty note onto the van. Then later on, he sees a wallet on the sidewalk, and nobody's around, so he takes all the cash out of the wallet and throws it in a trash can. So this is an untrustworthy person. We don't like this person. Then we say, which is more probable? A, this person is a teacher. B, this person is a teacher, and then for different groups of people, I can plug in different potential group memberships. So we can see which of these groups is more like avid big game hunter Linda and which is more like feminist Linda, essentially. This is the percent of people who pick option B. And nobody is directly picking between these two groups. So it's crucial to keep in mind, if you're a given participant, you just choose A, teacher, or B, teacher and whatever group you happen to be. Different people get different groups assigned to them. So these all look a lot like our avid big game hunter version of Linda. So given that description, nobody picks option B, which would indicate that they think the perpetrator might be gay or Christian or Jewish or Muslim or a feminist. But a lot of people pick option B if option B implies that this perpetrator might not believe in God. We included one other group. We wanted to pick a group that would just be unambiguously distrusted, kind of to calibrate our scale to see how far we could push people up on that description. And it turns out people also thought that this person might be a rapist. The atheist bar looks bigger. These are actually equivalent to each other. So no, people don't intuitively trust atheists less than rapists. That's good news, bad news, right? So to extend this work, that was just kind of one description of somebody doing something untrustworthy. I wanted to explore the moral domain. So has anybody heard of a psychologist by the name of Jonathan Haidt? All right, I'll plug his books too. So he's argued that we have 5 separate moral foundations. So instead of just having kind of overall umbrella morality, he'll say you can split it up into kind of 5 different themes. And so, for instance, basically everybody would say that harm is morally relevant. If you harm others for funsies, that is immoral. Ditto for fairness. Pretty much everybody agrees that you shouldn't rip people off. So the harm and fairness moral foundations, these are basically universal. But there are 3 other foundations that you seem to get predictable differences where some people say, yeah, that's super morally relevant. Other people would say, you know, that's weird. I don't know why you're telling me about this. But I wouldn't say it's immoral. So we have issues of loyalty to one's group. Some people would say it is immoral to burn the US flag. Other people would say, like, yeah, like, maybe don't do it. It's not particularly nice, but immoral isn't the word you'd use to describe it. Also, respect for authority. Some people would say, for instance, that it is flat out immoral for you to insult your father. Other people say, like, well, that's weird. Don't do it, I guess, but no, not morally relevant. Then he has this 5th foundation, which he calls purity. If you're familiar with this work, you might know why I have a roast chicken there. If you don't, you'll find out later. Essentially, purity-based morality is a notion that there's a fundamental natural order of the world that we shouldn't mess with. And so a lot of sexual morality gets lumped into the purity side of things. So what I wanted to do is basically come up with descriptions of people violating each of the moral foundations, and then do that same Linda problem and see whether they'd assume that the perpetrator might be an atheist. So describe somebody doing something immoral, and then find out who people think the perpetrator was. So for harm, I had a story about a guy named Russell who he's on the bus on the way home from work, and an obese woman gets on the bus, and rather than do the nice thing and give up his seat, he decides to ridicule her about her appearance. Then he gets off the bus, and a stray dog comes up to him to beg for food, so he kicks it in the face. Harm. For fairness, the story was about Brad. One of his friends helped him move into a new apartment. Then a couple weeks later, she emailed him to say, hey, help me out. And so he ignored the call. So he's not reciprocating. He also goes down to his local bar to play cards, and when he's playing with strangers, he cheats in order to take their money. This is unfair. For loyalty, we have the story of Leslie, who she's an American. She goes traveling in Europe, and she pretends to be a Canadian. The Olympics are on that year, and she roots against the US team. This causes some rifts with her family, so she cuts off all ties with them for a year. So who would say that's immoral? Who would say she's just being kind of a bitch? Yeah. You guys would score low on the loyalty-based morality. This tells me that you're all probably fairly politically liberal. So that's one of the biggest splits on the three where I said some people endorse them, some don't. Political conservatives tend to say those are morally relevant. Liberals tend to say, no big deal. For respect for authority, we have Drew, who she doesn't like her boss, so when she's at work, whenever her boss turns around, she flips him off. And then also she's walking home from work one day, and she's crossing a street, and police are setting up a barricade for a parade the next day, and the police ask her nicely to find a different way home, and she tells them to fuck off, and she walks through their stupid barricade. Now for purity, here's where things get weird. This is all Jonathan Haidt stuff. But we have Catherine, she's a moral vegetarian. She works in a medical school pathology lab, where, among other things, they dissect cadavers. And one night, she's working with a cadaver that's set to be cremated the next day, and she looks at it, and she thinks, wow, that is a waste of perfectly edible meat. So she cuts off a little bit of the meat, takes it home, cooks it, and eats it. Who says that's immoral? Who says weird, but not sure moral's the word? All right, liberals. But we all have the intuition that something's off on these purity ones, right? So then we say, which is more probable? A, this character is a teacher. B, this character is a teacher, and then depending on which group of participants you are, we either imply that B says they don't believe in God, or B says that they're gay. Basically, we're just seeing if, for these moral violations, if people think the perpetrator is an atheist, or if they think the perpetrator is gay. On to the results. Again, same setup. Higher bars is that people think at a gut level that the perpetrator is either atheist or gay. And people pick option B more for atheists than for gays for, puppy kicking, poker cheat, Canadian feigning, scofflaw, cannibals. So basically, you describe somebody doing something immoral. This is telling us that people are kind of forming a mental image of an atheist who might be doing it. Yeah. They might what now? Yeah, so it just means that none of this specific moral content is what people are intuitively associating with gays. You could probably come up with something else, another description that would get it. I think we tried sexually promiscuous once upon a time. And that one, you start getting higher bars for gays. Atheists are still high on that one, too, so I guess that's good. So across moral foundations, people are intuitively assuming that people who do immoral stuff don't believe in God. I should also say in these studies, did I ever use the word atheist? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. You get the exact same effects whether you use the A word or you just say this person doesn't believe in God. So it's not just a case of people associating the word atheist with, dirty communist.
All right. We have the Piggest Raffle is one way that we can raise money to help do all the great things that we do at the Tri-State Freethinkers. So if you go to piggestraffle.com, you can buy a pig for $5. And you can, that money goes directly to the Tri-State Freethinkers. And you're entered into a raffle to where you could potentially win $5,000 for you and $5,000 for us. So it is the gift that kind of keeps on giving. And there's also a lease of a Toyota Prius and lots of other great prizes that you could win. So please go to piggistraffle.com, buy a piggy, and help us.
And all that. All right, so there's some support for this prediction that, you know, people are saying take God out of the equation, and these people are capable of just about anything. Why stop there? Why not compare to other groups? So atheist gay is a nice contrast, but you can look at other contrasts and also look at other immoral actions because these studies are fun to run. So we have another purity-based one, and this is some classic work by Haidt, where you describe a brother and sister. They're traveling somewhere or other, and one night they decide it would be fun and interesting if they tried making love with each other. She's on birth control, he uses a condom, they don't have to worry about that, they never tell anyone about it, they feel it brings them closer together, but they never try it again. So again, in terms of strict utilitarian ethics, no harm, no foul, but this just feels kind of cringeworthy. Something feels off about this. And in Haidt's work with the same dilemma, they'll get people who will just insist that this is immoral and wrong, even though they can't actually explain a good utilitarian reason for having that intuition. So we give people that description, and we say, which is more probable? A, this guy works in retail, or B, he works in retail, and then again, we can plug in different groups to see who people think might be into incest. And here we're comparing, I guess, across a bunch of different religious group memberships. So nobody thinks that incest is being driven by Buddhists, Christians, Hindu, Jews, or Muslims. But yeah, atheists might be into that. Now we have our chicken. This one, the story was Jack. He's on his way home from work, and he needs to pick up something for dinner, stops at a butcher shop, gets a chicken, goes home, unwraps the chicken carcass, has sex with it, cleans it out, cooks it, and eats it alongside a nice glass of Chardonnay. Which is more probable? A, Jack's a teacher, B, Jack's a teacher, same setup. So that behavior doesn't cue people in that Jack might belong to various ethnic groups. But yeah, he might be an atheist. It turns out none of these actually statistically differ from each other. It looks like, yeah, I don't know what that. So these ones are all kind of fun to chuckle about. And we might say, all right, people think atheists are potentially into some bizarre stuff, but nothing in any of those scenarios is all that bad. People always kind of cringe when I talk about kicking the dog, but we're kind of still in no harm, no foul territory. So I wanted one that basically everybody would agree that is heinous and immoral. So here the story was about Dax. And when Dax was a kid, he really liked hurting animals. So he started out by pulling the wings off flies, then he started torturing stray cats around his neighborhood. And as he grew up, he found that he didn't get much of a thrill from doing this, so he moved on to people. And he currently has the dismembered bodies of 5 homeless people who he's killed buried in his basement. This is pretty immoral stuff, right? So, which is more probable? A is a teacher, B is a teacher, and whatever. Nobody thinks that the serial killer belongs to any of these groups. But yeah, about half of the participants are picking option B. So they think that a description of somebody engaged in serial murder is as representative of atheists as that Linda description was representative of somebody who's active in a feminist movement. So that's pretty striking stuff, actually. I haven't mentioned who these participants were. So you might be scratching your head wondering who the fuck are these people who are in Will's studies. Across all of these studies, I'll ask people about their own religious beliefs, and the easiest way to visualize this is I'll ask them one question where they rate their own belief in God from 0, I definitely don't believe, to 100, I most definitely do believe. So here are the participants. So 0, Dawkins, 100, devout. You can see that overall this isn't a strongly religious pool of participants. And we actually get a pretty big spike of people who aren't the least bit religious. And I did some analyses across all these studies. If I only pick people who self-identified as atheists and rated their belief in God at 0, they still are more likely to pick option B for atheist than for any of the other groups that we have. So the effect is way smaller for the atheist participants than other participants, but even atheists seem to be a bit morally suspicious of fellow atheists. All those studies, people were recruited from the US, so again, we could be back in the territory of where the US is just strange. So what about the rest of the world? Recently, we actually just submitted this for publication a while ago. It took 2.5 years to run this study. We took the serial killer example. I got some data in the US, and I got in touch with friends and colleagues and friends of friends, et cetera, and we decided to run this study in 13 countries around the world. So here's our roster. And you'll notice we have some strongly religious countries, United Arab Emirates, Mauritius is really religious, India, but we also have some of the most secular countries on Earth. So depending on how you do the numbers, Czech might be the most secular on Earth right now. We have China, which is formally and officially atheistic country. Netherlands, these are undergrads at the University of Amsterdam. Finland as well. So we've got a good spread from strongly secular to strongly religious countries. And we basically did that same task with the serial killer example. Here are the results. So this graph's a bit wonky, but essentially this right here would be no effect whatsoever. The higher up the dot is, this is the more people associate that serial killer description with atheism. And then this is just the average self-rated belief in God in each country. So basically what you can see is only in Finland and New Zealand do we not have consistent evidence of people thinking that serial killers are probably atheists. And also with the color gradient, you can see that, as you'd expect, as we go to more and more religious countries, the effect gets larger. So people trust atheists less and less and less in more religious countries. That's some weird stats, don't worry about it. So again, the ones in green are the places where people think that serial killers are probably atheists. In red is, in Finland, there was definitely no effect. In New Zealand, it was somewhat attenuated. So if you're trying to plan your next around the world vacation, in purple, we have safe places for atheists. I would recommend Finland in the northern hemisphere summer, and then you can flip and get a full year of summer by going to New Zealand. And again, in this overall sample, where we had 3,400 people from all over the world, without worrying about the stats, again, if I just grab the atheist participants, they still show the effect overall. It's smaller than among religious participants, but even, for instance, atheist students, again, at the University of Amsterdam, where they're smoking pot every day, they're a bit morally suspicious of atheists. So again, getting back to why people distrust atheists, I think it really does boil down to this issue of people's intuitions about where morality comes from. So we've got the nice, famous Dostoevsky line, without God in the future life, it means everything is permitted now, one can do anything. And at least according to my participants, it seems like people's intuition is that, yeah, once you pull belief in God out of the equation, people are capable of pretty much anything, not in a good way. How am I on time? Cool, I'll roll them. Otherwise, I could have skipped a bunch of slides, and it's like stuff my grad students are working on right now. So what's going on? We have a couple of projects. Here's Maxine, one of my grad students, where we're trying to figure out why people are so morally skeptical of atheists. And we thought of at least two possibilities. One of them we kind of think of as the broken moral compass. So maybe people are thinking religion is where we get our moral rules, and people who don't believe in God just don't know what's right and what's wrong. Second possibility is we kind of have just the twisted psychopath possibility, where maybe people think, sure, atheists can tell right from wrong, they just don't care. They're just going to pick wrong no matter what. And without dwelling in the details of the studies, it looks like we have evidence more for the broken moral compass idea, more so than the psychopath idea. So people seem to think, for instance, if you see this redheaded child and you think, man, I hate redheaded children, I should kill her. Oh, never mind. God says we're not supposed to do that. So let's not. So people's intuition is, though, if you break this step, then people are more capable of potentially killing that poor little girl. So what's interesting is our participants, their intuitions seem to be saying that they think atheists just can't tell right from wrong, which would imply that they'd think that if they themselves didn't believe, would they be engaging in immoral behavior? What's interesting is we did one study where we just asked people to list things that they would do if their religion didn't prohibit it. So if they really thought this is what was going on, they should be listing, murder, torture, having sex with chicken carcasses. I don't know. And nobody listed that. So the bigger the word is, this is a word that's more frequently written by UK undergrads if we ask them what they'd do more of if their religion didn't prohibit it. And it's really just getting wasted and having sex. That's it. Nobody mentioned violence in particular. That one's pretty fun. So that's one possible explanation for why people don't trust atheists. It's because they think atheists honestly can't tell right from wrong. Now let's talk about what are some consequences of having these types of negative perceptions of atheists. So what's going on? One thing that we've looked at is, well, if you really think atheists are potentially this immoral, you might want to behave aggressively towards them. You might want to hurt them to keep them away from you. Here's Ben and Dave, say hi. Ben came all the way from Singapore to do this research, which is cool. So we wanted to look at people's aggressive inclinations towards atheists. And due to ethical constraints, obviously we can't bring people into the lab and say, here's an atheist, beat him up if you want to. We need basically a crude lab proxy for that. So some people came up with this voodoo doll task where you give them a doll and you say, all right, picture that this person is blah. You can put no pins in it. You can put up to 51 pins in this symbolic person. That's what it looks like with 51 pins. How many pins would you like to put in it? We'd, tell people, all right, now this is the atheist doll. How many pins do you want to stick in the atheist doll? How many pins would you want to stick in the gay doll? How many pins would you want to stick in a Muslim doll? Or in just kind of a generically religious doll? We were obviously predicting high levels of aggression here. These are not popular groups either, so we were somewhat agnostic about what to expect there. And we thought they'd go nice on the religious one. This is an awful graph, sorry. But to summarize, people want to stick more pins in the atheist doll than any of the other ones. You get kind of a predictable pattern where there's more aggression towards the gay and Muslim doll than towards the generically religious one. But atheist trumps even other disliked groups like gays and Muslims. All right, so what do I have next? There's a bunch of work on people not liking atheists. And that's the sad part of the talk where, those are not good impressions we're finding people having. Be nice to close with some good news. So what might actually help reduce these negative perceptions of atheists? And there's a couple ideas out there, and I've actually done a bit of research on this. Who's heard of the openly secular thing that launched recently? Cool. I got to go to their little launch party and give essentially the same talk. That was fun. So one potential thing that could help is having some of these secular groups. So for instance, the American Humanist Association. The important thing to emphasize here has nothing to do with this, but just showing people that you don't need to believe in God in order to, say, not commit serial murder. But even more so, I think if people would just see people who are open about themselves not being religious, but acting just like anyone else, this could really help. And openly secular, I have high hopes for. So would it work if you have people coming out and just saying, yeah, I'm not religious, and it's not that big of a deal? This potentially could really help reduce stigma against atheism, but only if done properly. So there's a huge caveat with the whole, it's Silverman, right? He says, everybody needs to come out. I think everybody coming out, it could really help. It could super backfire, depending on how people go about it. So within social psychology, there's the contact hypothesis, which basically says If there's prejudice against a group, prejudice against that group will decline to the extent that people come into contact with individuals from that group more often. So this is summarizing a ton of research over 50 years on the contact hypothesis. And the general finding is that contact can cause meaningful reductions in prejudice. Not only do attitudes toward the immediate participants usually become more favorable, so the person you've been in contact with, but so do attitudes towards the entire outgroup members in other situations, and even outgroups not involved in the contact. So for instance, if somebody has positive contact with in the lab with a gay confederate who's working with the researchers, all of a sudden they'll say, well, not only do I like that guy more, I also like gay people more, and potentially I'm a bit less racist now. So contact can be hugely powerful. But the caveats, you need to actually realize that you're interacting with people from a certain group in order for it to be effective. And two, it only works when the contact is positive in nature. If the contact is negative, it backfires. So you get backlash, more prejudice. So realized contact, this is a big deal for non-believers because it's a concealable identity. If people aren't coming out, nobody will ever know that they've been in contact with non-believers. So potentially something like openly secular could be helpful here, where you have people just basically being more open about their own lack of beliefs. So this could work. I know a lot of leaders in the various atheist groups draw parallels with something like the gay pride movement, which really helped. But this only works if people come out. If people don't realize they're interacting with either a gay person or an atheist, they're not going to realize that these people are just like us. And it also is possible that you don't need this direct contact where I realize I'm interacting with a person of that group. We actually have some studies where if we just tell people actual numbers about how common atheists are, then they trust atheists more. So even without direct contact, just finding out actual atheist prevalence can help. So there's the kind of concealable nature of religious non-belief can complicate contact. That's why people need to come out. But again, we need to keep it positive. So the goal of the contact hypothesis is to normalize a stigmatized group. It's to get people to say, well, I thought these people were totally immoral. Now that I meet them, they seem normal. Not that they seem smarter or more moral or anything else, just that they're just like anyone else. And this only works when the contact itself seems normal. So a lot of people, even though they're morally suspicious of atheists, it's somewhat of a hollow stereotype. You learn that somebody's an atheist, you don't know much else about them. So there are negative stereotypes. It's important that people don't conform to negative stereotypes. So for instance, there are stereotypes about atheists being argumentative. If people are coming out by engaging in arguments about religion, yeah, there might be very valid reasons to get in these debates with people about religion, but it's not going to help in terms of reducing stigma against religious non-belief. Again, it has to be positive contact. So that's basically what I said. Essentially, I think for atheists and non-believers right now, it's a powerful time for filling in the stereotype a bit. So instead of just saying, hey, we don't believe in God, it's we don't believe in God, but here are other things that we do stand for. And especially if you can fill that in with positive things, people will like that. Negative contact can make matters worse. This seems fairly intuitive, right? If people kind of feel like they don't like atheists and then they have a rough go of things when they meet an atheist, they're going to become more entrenched in their views. So might not help to conform stereotypes that atheists are argumentative, smug, anti-religious, angry, or bitter. We've got some research on this. So us and other labs, we've used one of the passages from the God Delusion about it's a long passage where it's, the God of the Old Testament is the maniacal, homicidal, whatever. It goes on for like a paragraph. Reading this, it triggers a disgust response among believers to the point where if you give them a drink afterward and have them rate how much they like it, they will say, ugh, it's disgusting. So they get this icky feeling just reading that then they displace on the world. And also, it doesn't reduce distrust of atheists, and it might actually make it worse. Back to these aggression studies, we also had a follow-up study where we'd have either somebody who, in this case, the voodoo doll was described as somebody who's working on campus about issues of social justice, and they were either promoting their atheist group, saying that they wanted help for promoting events and recruiting new members, or they were described as somebody who's part of a religious, of an atheist group, and they're trying to reduce religious influence on campus. So they're either promoting yay atheism, or they're trying to block religion. It turns out that people want to stick way more pins in the atheist when he's anti-religious rather than pro-atheist. So it's more important to stand for something than against something else. So take-home messages on that front. Things like openly secular and people coming out can and should help. But again, we have these caveats. It has to be positive contact in order to have the beneficial effects. So the way I think about this is gay pride worked because it wasn't telling people that they're wrong to be straight. It was telling people that it's okay to not be straight. So in terms of reducing stigma against religious non-belief, it's more important to build relationships with other people rather than arguments. In terms of reducing stigma, it's more important to be normal than to be right in some sort of a debate. That's not to say there aren't other valid reasons to engage in debate and to want to be right about it, but reducing stigma isn't going to be the primary outcome of that. You're probably not going to change anyone's minds either. And overall, be the stereotype you want other people to apply to your group.
Yes, I understand that my whole life is just a blink of an eye. The history of the earth is with each moment that goes by. But this moment that I'm with you, it feels like time has stood still. It feels somehow like it matters, and that it always will. Thank you so much.